I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Dror Moreh, who has directed a really just powerful film documentary called The Corridor of Power. And Dror, I'm actually really curious about titles because I find that the titles, particularly in documentaries, take us in really interesting directions. How did you settle? When in the process did you decide on that title, and what do you think that title means?
Very early on, I think from the beginning, I called it The Corridors of Power. It was because I felt there is the gap between what we think happens there and those kind of very crucial decisions that are made in those corridors between those people that are speaking to themselves, speaking with each other, and making decisions that influence lives of millions in somewhere else in the globe. So for me, the title was just to say this is the place where decisions are made.
As I watched the film, I think there are so many emotions that this film kind of evokes, but for me, the primary one was I was very angry at the end of this film, and I'm curious as to what kind of emotions you went through as you were researching it and putting it together.
Look, I started the work on the movie in 2014, so it's already 8 years in the making. I cannot really describe thoroughly what I went through this 8 years. Samantha Power called her latest book The Education of an Idealist. I think I went through a kind of a similar process where I went through the education of an idealist, because when I started the movie, I was thinking, yes, America is the shining city on the hill. America is the place where to complain when things like that happens, atrocities, crimes against humanity, and America should stand for those people. And I understood during the process of doing the movie that it's so much more complicated than, just black and white. There is thousands shades of gray in this kind of area. And anger would be, Rwanda for me was the most devastating chapter to watch and to see, because everything was out there. And in a span of 100 days, 900,000 people were massacred only because they were Tutsi. And it's horrible. And the fact that we are now in a world that things like that continue to happen, I don't know, we didn't learn the lessons that were so brightly clear 75 years ago after the end of the Second World War seems to have been forgotten. And that's the most devastating, I would say, fact for me from doing this movie.
Yeah, this concept of never again was such a good idea at the time, but it seems like one of the takeaways of this film is the fact that, yeah, never again unless there's political, obstacles.
Exactly, never again with a question mark. It's not never again. Is it really never again? No, it's not. It is happening again and again. And in each time you have very good excuses why not to follow that. Each time you hear the reasoning from the people, why they didn't work, why they didn't work, why they didn't act. And the reasoning sounds, perfectly normal to that situation. But I mean, it cannot be. We are in the 21st century. It cannot be that those kind of things continue to happen. As we speak, I'm in Berlin now. The temperature outside is -2. You are in California, it's much better weather, but 1,000 kilometers from here, from where I am, the Ukrainian people, a nation of 40, 45, 50 million people, are now without warmth, without heating, without electricity, because one person decided that he doesn't want them to join democratic values of the West. So, I mean, those things are unbelievable that they continue to happen again and again.
There's, one of the things that is so fascinating about this film is the access that you got to some of these people. I don't think I've ever seen that many powerful people for one film. And so I'm curious, what was the process of getting them to sit down with you?
It was a long process. As I said, it's been 8 years in the making. The first interview was with the late former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. The last one was with Samantha Power So she was in 2014, Samantha Power 2020, on a span of 6 years. Look, I am a man that doesn't give up, and when someone says no through the door, I'm coming through the window. If he doesn't say no through the window, I'm coming under the door. And surprisingly, let's say 98% of the people I wanted to interview agreed to be interviewed. They wanted to speak, they wanted to tell the story. I felt with a lot of them that those incidents, those atrocities that they were in a position where they can prevent that or couldn't prevent that, lay heavily on their conscience. You felt that in the conversation with them, you felt that they wanted to speak, they wanted to unburden themselves with what happened during those, and why did they take those decisions.
It's interesting because there are two, there are two, still current living presidents that are the primary focus, Presidents Clinton and Obama. Did you approach them at all?
No, I didn't want. At the beginning, I thought that I will interview them, but at one point, I decided not to do that because I wanted to put the audience at the seat of the decision maker. I wanted that the audience, anyone that goes to the movie or sees the movie, will hear the pros and cons of intervention or non-intervention, and will ask themselves, what would I do had I been in that position now? And for that moment, I decided not to interview the president because it made no sense to me. What they did is known. And the arguments to why they should or shouldn't was there with me. So I decided to do that like that. By the way, also Bush 43 was supposed, Iraq and what happens during that time is also present in the movie. So it's not only democratic. I know that people are sensitive to that. I'm not an American, so I'm not really aware of Democratic and I know what Democratic and Republicans stand for. I don't have that partisan point of view. Regrettably, during Clinton time, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Kosovo happened, and during Obama time, Libya and Syria happened. So that's why they are there.
I actually feel like it was interesting to me, even as an American, there were so many things that I wasn't familiar with. There were so many things. I mean, the Iraq War during Bush 43 was so kind of omnipresent for me, and yet I felt underinformed about the events in Serbia and Kosovo, and I felt underinformed about Libya and Syria. So I guess my question really is, what was the most surprising thing that you learned in the process of this?
Look, I would summarize that from the quote that Jake Sullivan, who is now the current national security advisor, said, and it's a beautiful, for me, it's a beautiful sequence also visually, when he speaks about when you go into the situation room, you understand that it's a bunch of people with imperfect information, taking imperfect decision, which contributes to the imperfect decision that they are making. So in a way, the fact that we are all human beings in those rooms, like you, like me, those people that sits there and takes decision and debate those kind of crucial debates, whether to intervene in one place, whether to prevent massacre in Syria or prevent massacre in Libya or in Bosnia or in Rwanda, and they have all the pros and cons, and they don't have the full information. I do believe that President Clinton didn't know the scope of what was happening in Rwanda. But the fact that he didn't, they didn't act, America is, if I'm coming back to Rwanda, 900,000 people died, mostly with machetes. And it's devastating to understand that it could have been prevented easily. So I would say the most surprising thing for me was to understand how human factor plays in those rooms, how each and every one of those people there are human, exactly like you. And it doesn't say anything if they are bright or not so bright. They take decisions which influence millions and millions of people.
I wanted to ask about a stylistic thing that I noticed in this film. One of my favorite parts of this movie was the way that you kind of like set these photographs of people in the office, these different kind of dissolving photos. It almost looks animated to a certain. Can you talk about that particular stylistic choice of the people like in the Oval Office and in these rooms?
Look, I would have loved to have videos from those rooms when those decisions were made. Regrettably, I don't have that. What I discovered though is that, and this is from my previous movie, The Human Factor, is that the President of the United States has photographers, still photographers around him all the time. They take photos all the time wherever he is. And you just have to file an Freedom of Information Act and get access to those photos. And basically those stories that you hear from the people that I interviewed are coming to life with those still photos. What I did do is computer graphic animation created kind of, let's say, a cinematic movement within this 2D photo. And my aim was to create a feeling for the viewer as if he is the fly on the wall while those debates are happening. So he is basically, I am telling you the story of what goes on in the room. And I wanted the audience to feel that they are there. They are witnessing what they are discussing live as it happening. And to contrast that with what is going on the ground, with the amazing, with the heartbreaking visuals and archives that we had from the ground. So you have on one hand, this antiseptic rooms where, you know, those walls are very beautiful and you have to take decisions. And in contrast to that, you have what's going on on the field, on the battleground, on the killing fields.
I was really stunned in terms of the footage of some of these atrocities happening. I mean, it's footage that a lot of people don't get to see. And I'm curious, just from a filmmaking standpoint, how did you decide what to show, what not to show? Were there things that you made a decision not to show because you thought it would be too brutal, or did you want to just have it all out there to see?
It's a very good question. You know, I mean, look, me and my editing team were arguing about what kind of footage to put inside and what to take out. And you can imagine that I've watched hundreds of hours of those horrible images that are there. For me, at one point, I decided that I cannot shy away from how genocide looks like. You know, at the end of the day, this is what atrocities look like. And I'll give you a small story, you know, this horrible scene after Srebrenica, in Srebrenica, where they're shooting, where those young soldiers are shooting young men in the field in a summer day, beautiful summer day, but they're shooting them just because they are Muslims. And the tape was almost an hour and a half or 2 hours of horrible, horrible scenes of what happened that day in Srebrenica. And I remember the reaction of one of the commissioner editor who watched this scene cut into, let's say, 2 minutes or a minute and a half that it is in the film. She started to cry in front of me. And she said to me, it's so shocking to see that. And I said, that's exactly, for me, the issue there in that sequence was those young people who are shooting. How they are, you know, it's like they are doing their day job, basically going out. The job is to kill human beings. And this is what they do. This is something that we heard also with the Nazis in Auschwitz, that, you know, they were family people going at the evening to their families, helping some probably old lady cross the street, and on the day job, they killed Jews. And this was, for me, almost the same. You could see that those young people who were shooting those Muslims didn't really grasp what they were doing. They didn't, or they grasped, but it didn't affect them at all. They were just doing the day job. And it's horrible to think about the implication of that on each and every one of us. You know, there's an amazing book by Christopher Brown called Ordinary People. And it is about a unit in the Wehrmacht who was executing Jews during World War II in 1942, before Auschwitz. And the conclusion from that book is that it can happen to each and every one of us. It's kind of when you dehumanize the other side strong enough and long enough, then those kind of atrocities can happen anywhere. And that's really, really depressing.
It is, and especially in the backdrop of a lot of things that have been happening in the United States in terms of mass shootings and, mass shootings that are as a result of, sometimes racial, sometimes, sexual orientation. We're still seeing that. And I'm curious, the film, goes up pretty much through the Obama administration, but we're now more than one administration removed from that, and we're in the middle of this Ukrainian issue. Are we ever going to learn the lesson?
That's the $1 million question. And I think, as Tony Lake says at the end of the movie, where he says genocide and crimes against humanity will continue to happen because that's human nature. What we have to do, for me, and this is for me the lesson of the movie, as citizen, each one of us, as citizen of this world, as a citizen of this planet, there are so many problems in this planet, on this planet, and we have to care more. We have to be more active in demanding from our leaders to create a better world for each one of us. Otherwise, from what I learned, politicians needs, especially in America as well, but politician needs to be pushed. They need to understand that people are angry about something. If they don't feel that push towards action, then they will never do. For them, the status quo is what maintains and what makes the day. And each and every one of us, look, there is an example in Darfur where America kind of rose up after the Iraq War. America learned that there is a massacre and crimes against humanity and genocide in Darfur. And there was a movement, a huge movement in America who called for action. Didn't really help at the end of the day, but it pushed politicians to act more, to do more, to be more aware. And I think that if we want for our children and our children to have a world where never again is not just a phrase, but something meaningful, then we have to make sure that this message will sound loud and clear every day of every. And if I can appeal to those Americans who can push their representative to push Biden to help more Ukraine and to give more support to that, let them do that.
Well, Dror, thank you so much. It's just I really hope everybody gets a chance to see this film, because it's shocking and eye-opening, and shows both the best and the worst of humanity, and maybe can push us a little bit more towards the better. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders in the coming weeks. Dror Moreh, The Corridors of Power, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's been a pleasure to be with you.